Let me tell you why you and Augusta County should be interested in this. This is a map of Virginia. These are the outlines of the counties that we have within Virginia. It used to be 100, it's 90-some now. This is Augusta County. That red in the northern part of Augusta County are known uranium deposits. It's not just in the southern part of the state. Now, the caveat here is that the deposit is small, at least as far as they know. It was only roughly studied. And the other caveat is that discovery of economic deposits would require considerable more effort. So the bottom line here is there's two things. We know there's something there. We don't know how much is there, and it'll take a lot more work. The other thing is, as the economy changes, and it becomes, the price of uranium goes up, it becomes more economical to mine it or look for it. So this is why you should give some attention to the discussion regarding uranium, even though it is in the southern part of the state. I've shown you, number one, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to try to write it down. What I'm telling you is there are a group of reports which center around this issue. There's a lot more than this. I have maybe about 20 reports on uranium. And they go back into the 80s, if you will. But there's two I'm going to use in this presentation primarily. One is one by the National Academy of Science, and the other one I'll refer to is what's called the Baker study, or the Baker Engineering, which is a study that was done for the city of Virginia Beach, and what Virginia Beach has made the foundation of their position on the matter. I'm going to start with this, again, don't be overwhelmed here, please. This is just straight factual information. Yes, it is of engineering nature, and yes, it is of scientific nature. But it's easy to understand, I think. Somewhere about 4.5, 5 billion years ago, there was a lot of spewing out of volcanoes of all sorts of stuff, and part of that stuff that spewed out was uranium. And it was spewed out onto the surface of the earth. And it sort of sat there a long time. And then somewhere about 10 million years ago, much closer to where we are today, the rivers and the oceans of that time, and believe me, they didn't look like any of our rivers and oceans of today, but those rivers and oceans of that time started depositing layers of sand and sandstone around on the Earth's surface. And this was during normal flows of those rivers and normal activity of those oceans. And then there were times, as you know, you get a stormy time, the river's up, the river floods, and when the river flooded back in those rivers in those days, or the storms lashed, the oceans lashed the coast of whatever the coasts were, they started moving not only sand, but they started moving shale, clay, and silt. And they built this stuff up in layers. Layer of sandstone, layer of silt, layer of clay or something. When it was first formed, it was sort of one on top of the other, and it was all sort of horizontal, but the earth got grumpy about it all and started bucking around, and things started moving, and these layers really, instead of being flat, they tend to go down, they tend to go up. And when I say down, they may go down thousands of feet and come back up. So it's an undulating thing. What happened was in the sand layers is where the water gathered. And that's typically where the aquifers are today, in those sand or sandstone contents. The water in those areas picked up the uranium and started moving it with the flow of the water. There is nothing on God's green earth that isn't soluble in water. It might be metal, but it is soluble. Water will eventually take it and move it along. So it picked up this uranium and it started moving it. But the minute it ran into these up and down layers of the silt and other layers of things like the shale and the clay, when it hit those layers, it dropped out the uranium. The uranium was deposited at those locations. And you can imagine over some millions of years, a heck of a lot of uranium happened to be deposited at certain places. And that is what our ore deposits are today, where it accumulated at those interfaces over a long length of time. This is Virginia, and I want you to understand something. Uranium is everywhere. It's not just in some little deposit in some place down in southern Virginia. It's not in some little place such as a deposit up in the upper part of our county. This is a map, it's called an aeroradiometric map of Virginia. And basically everywhere you see red is where the parts per million of uranium is around 1.7 to 2. And if you see a place where it's blue, then it's somewhat lower, 0.2 to 0.4. The point is, you cannot go anywhere around in your yard or anywhere and pick up dirt and not also have uranium in your hand. You've heard people talk about radon gas. Radon gas is simply a product, a decay product from uranium. It decays into what's called the radium chain, and the radium creates the radon gas. So the fact that you, over where you are, you build a house, they want you to check for the radon gas, maybe coming up through your basement. The reason is there's uranium everywhere. It's not like it's a monster under your bed. It's not like it's a monster hiding in the closet. It's everywhere. Not as much as it is in ore deposits, but the point is, it's everywhere. So is every other element we have. A little bit of copper, a little bit of aluminum, a little bit of zinc, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's everywhere. These are the major known locations, what would be called deposits. And we go back to Augusta County, where the deposits are in Augusta County, but there are over a fair portion. And particularly they form along the Blue Ridge chain. The main one that you hear talked about today is this one down in Pennsylvania County, at what's called the Coles Hill location, or Coles Hill deposit. And that's where all the discussion is, and that's where the General Assembly is trying to deal with the matter regarding ban on uranium, and that's what you're going to hear about over and over again. I just don't think it will go away. If I wanted to pull uranium and mine it, I have three options to me as to how I can do it. I can do it by way of what's called an open pit mining. If you think of that as just like digging a big hole in the ground, or an overgrown size, big deep swimming pool area, and you're literally taking the dirt, just digging a hole, grabbing the dirt, running it over, putting it in a processor, and taking the uranium out of it. About a quarter of uranium around the world is obtained that way. There's another way called conventional underground mining, and it's called conventional because it's no different whether you're doing coal mining or any other form of mining under the ground. Basically the method's the same. You're going to run a tunnel down in there somehow under the ground, go down in that tunnel and pick up what you want and bring it back to the surface. Again, about 25% of it's done that way. A more recent method that they're using, but they're not going to do it, and I'll tell you why and when we get further into this. Another way they're doing it is called in situ leaching. In situ just means you do it on site at that place. By leaching, it simply means you're going to run a solution, acidic or base solution, through the ore itself underground, and you're going to leach out the uranium and bring only the uranium back up to the surface. About half of it is obtained around the world in that way, but we will not be doing that in Virginia. As I said, conventional underground mining is, in most respects, it's no different than the other kind of mining technique. The mines range anywhere from a couple hundred feet down to 3,000 feet under the ground. The one at Coles Hill will go down around 1,500 feet underground to pick up the uranium, and you'll see that in a moment. And then no matter what you're mining, what you do is you go down in the ground, you tend to get up under the deposit of the uranium ore, or whatever ore it is you're trying to get out. Drill a little hole up in it, stick a piece of dynamite up in it, set the dynamite off and hope you got enough fuse you can run and get away from it. Boom, you got rubble. You grab that rubble and you bring it up to the surface. You've created a void where the rubble was, where the original ore was, and you keep going up higher, and you blast, and you get more rubble. You take the rubble out, and soon you got a big void down there under the ground. And you'll see that in a moment. But that's basically just a standard way. No matter what you're doing, that's called underground mining. There are 5 places that are the predominant providers of uranium around the world. One is in Australia. They're the lead producer. Other one is Kazakhstan, Canada, Russia, and South Africa. The United States is either 9th behind Namibia, Brazil, and Niger, or it's 6th in front of the same 3. It depends on whose table you want to look at. They have different ways of ranking the reserves, and this ranking changes as time goes on. But the United States is somewhere between 6th and 9th. Not a dominant producer at all. And please don't I don't expect anybody to read this table per se. But if you looked at where the uranium is within the United States, it's primarily in the western part. It's Wyoming, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, corner, Texas. And then there is what's called the other. And that other, believe it or not, even though they put California, Idaho, Montana, Nebraska, and a couple other places in here, that other is primarily here in Virginia. We happen to have one huge deposit of uranium in Virginia. Now, don't ask me why I wasn't around 4.5 million years ago in Texas, so I can't tell you why we happen to have it. I just know we have it. I told you we had 6 reports. I gave you the list of 6 reports. If anybody wants them, I'll be happy to send you where you can get these reports if you want to read them. You should, in fact, really, at some point. But the major one that has been used for all the information, and I'm going to use a lot of their information here, or some of it, is called the National Academy of Sciences report. And they did about a 500 to 700 page, depending on what you're looking at, page report on it. They had a very long summary and conclusion. Down at the bottom of it, the last bit of it says, the committee is convinced that the adoption and rigorous implementation of such practices, and such practices refers to engineering practices, would be necessary if uranium mining, processing, and reclamation were to be undertaken in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Their conclusion did not say, don't do it. Their conclusion did not say, you can't do it. Their conclusion wasn't that you shouldn't or couldn't or whatever. All they were saying was, if you're going to do this, guys, you better use safe ways of doing it. You better use safe engineering practices to do it. And if you read the report, they acknowledge safe engineering practices exist. So again, if you want to look at the safe engineering practices, I'll tell you where you can get the report. And I'd encourage you to go look at it. It's not really that deep, really. It's words, yeah, and you get cross-eyed after a while looking at them. But the information is there. The only thing, and I'm going to put this as a caveat, it's a little bit biased in my opinion, but in my way of thinking, but here I am. If you dig deep into the National Academy of Sciences website, you happen to find out that they also believe that all of the global warming that's occurring is due to man. Nothing's due to nature. So when they tell me, giving me great caution, I tend to be a little, you know, I'm paranoid. I tend to be a little bit suspicious when you tell me, oh, how I can do it, and then you tell me, oops, be careful. Well, I want to be careful. I've never done a thing in my life engineering-wise that didn't have at least a factor of 2 safety on it. I think it's just standard to be careful. This is Coles Hill. It's in Pennsylvania County, which is along the Virginia-North Carolina border. And about 2/3 the way up from the border is Coles Hill location. This is the Coles Hill location. If you think about it, this doesn't look any different than the countryside around here. It's not the Shenandoah Valley, but it's about the same. It's a countryside environment. I want 2 things. First, I want to emphasize that this is north, and then a couple of things I'll show you in a moment. Keep in mind, this way is north. This is D.C., down here's Miami. There are 2 locations where these deposits are on Coles Hill. There's a south location, a north location. This little roadway is probably about the width of a car or a truck. That's, if you can get an idea of the scale. It's not like huge, over hundreds of acres deposit. It's like somebody's residential site in terms of size. You know, somebody bought 5 acres, 6 acres, or whatever. That's about the size of this whole thing. Now, they own a huge amount of property boundary around it, which is a good thing, which I'll talk about also in a minute.